Well, welcome to Lunchtime Topics. I am Kate, Director of Programming and Communications at the Creative Coast, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit here in Savannah, Georgia, and we exist to catalyze the innovation economy here on coastal Georgia. So we achieve this through several means. One is our social and educational programming, as well as through our online mediums and our online resources. Today's guest for our lunchtime topic, and if you've never been to a lunchtime topic, I should tell you what that is. Lunchtime Topics is our bi-monthly educational program featuring a business expert who shares their wisdom with this area startup and entrepreneurial community. And today's guest, I'm excited to introduce you to. He is a member of the Creative Coast, and he's actually at the office, and I'm not right now. We were joking about that a little bit. Today's guest is Thomas Smith. And Thomas Smith, he is a local creative entrepreneur and SCAD alumni. He began his career by working corporate design jobs in the greater New York City area before going solo as a freelance designer and becoming a digital nomad. Like many have made that transition in the last couple of years. He returned to Savannah in 2018. And took a job as a creative director for a tech startup called Candor USA. It was in the healthcare space. And since leaving Candor, he's been really, really, really busy. And I can attest to that because I see him working in the office most every week. He's founded a creative agency called Anchor Point Collective, where he currently serves as the CEO. And he runs a freelancing entrepreneurship blog called Motmill. And he's also serving as the chief creative officer for a San Francisco-based cryptocurrency startup. So yes, very busy. So today's lunchtime topic, Thomas is going to be talking with us about the easiest and most cost-effective ways to accomplish your startup brand guide. And, when you're launching a startup, usually you have your know-how, what you're doing, like what is the why for your company? Why do you need it? And sometimes we forget the design aspect of things and making our startup look professional. So startups need a good design foundation to really set that tone for their brand. And, you can look like either, as Thomas said, you can look like a multi-million-dollar business or Joe Schmo's garage business. And which one do you think is going to sell better? So establishing your identity right off the bat is or will save you a lot of expensive changes in the future. So that's what we're going to talk about with Thomas today. And Thomas, without further ado, thank you for being here. We appreciate you coming on and chatting with us today.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
Yeah. So what is your background? A little bit more about it, if you don't mind sharing, and tell us about your history in the design field.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So to echo your intro a little bit, I went to Savannah College of Art and Design. I graduated and pretty much immediately moved back up to the New York tri-state area where I'm originally from. I started working corporate gigs through the Creative Group, which is like a division of Robert Half. It was a good way to get me into the industry, and I got a lot of gigs with like big companies. There was an Amazon subsidiary. Um, there were Verizon TV, and I got to work from these style guides that were made by these like really big design houses, and it was a great way to accrue experience really fast in terms of working in a corporate environment, working fast, meeting deadlines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But over time, it just got a little kind of redundant for me. I didn't really like being like a cog in the corporate machine. Not to sound cliche, but I wanted to have a more, a bigger impact on what I was doing. Um, so I took my last gig and started a freelance business, and I was doing most of that through Upwork. And I got a few clients, and probably before I should have, I booked a one-way ticket to Spain and went and started living the digital nomad life, and taking advantage of a lower cost of living and doing the Airbnb and hostel living, and kind of bootstrapping everything, and really building up my client base from there. Um, and so I came back to the States, and I freelanced some more. I landed back in Savannah, Georgia. And because it just felt like home. I went to college here, and I was looking for a place to land, and Savannah was it. And so I kind of ran into the Creative Coast and started working at their the first iteration of the Creative Coast, which was at a on the other side of town, and ran into the people at Candor USA who were starting their company there. And I kind of liked the vision of what they were doing, so I went on board with them as creative director and did that for 2 years. Again, it was kind of a trial by fire source of experience for me. It was wearing a lot of hats, not just being the creative director, but being the copywriter and the designer and the web developer and the demo guy and going into VC meetings and stuff like that. So that really is what made me fall in love with kind of the startup environment and entrepreneurship as a whole. I'd always kind of been in that realm through freelancing and stuff, but this was the first time I kind of saw the magic of it through like a smaller team, like coming together to create something big, and just the late nights and the camaraderie we formed there. That was really cool, and I had a great time. Um, so after a couple of years, I left Candor and started Anchor Point Collective, and in addition to partnering with a venture studio and building kind of their visions, their companies, we're taking just on a bunch of different clients, and mainly startups and new businesses and new lines of business, and that's been really cool so far. And yeah, just trying to kind of follow my passion and try new things and do new things, hence the cryptocurrency stuff and the blockchain startup and working with that. And then also I just love writing and hence the blog. So that's kind of where I do that. And outside of creativity, or outside of my professional creative career, I love to cook. I love to um, just do anything where I can kind of get my mind going and pursue these kind of abstract ideas and satiate that passion. So that is in not too few words my history in the creative field.
Well, you hit on some good points there that I think people watching for the purpose of the topic today should probably be aware of if they haven't started a business, is like the late nights and the hard work. But also, I think what's exciting about the startup world too is I've worked for a couple as well, and you really do get to dip your toe in everything, like you said. And you said, as you right now you're getting to try different things and you're enjoying that, but through the startup world, specifically working for one startup, you really do get a taste of everything, and you kind of almost become like instantaneously like a project manager, a product manager of sorts, right? Like, and so
It's like
it's
I like
yeah.
to say it's like you can, for any kind of young people watching, like um it's like you can either climb the corporate ladder and you can become like a principal designer, and then become like a senior designer, art director, and kind of go that way. I feel like with a startup, like you're taking dynamite and a drill and just going through the mountain and kind of skipping the corporate ladder. It's a little bit more bumps and bruises along the way, but it's a good way to skip a few of those rungs.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I definitely can relate to that. So, but specific to this topic, I guess, oops, I'm so sorry. Specific to this topic, and what we're talking about today is the design and creative checklist for new businesses. So if you're tuning in, it's probably because you have a business idea and you want to know what boxes you really need to kind of be checking off, or things you need to be focused on when you're designing your brand. Can you talk about a little bit why you're passionate about this specific topic?
Yeah, for sure. So practically speaking, I'm passionate about design because it's just, especially post COVID-19, like the world of everything's virtual. Design is, in my opinion, like the most important thing right now, because the consumer base for every type of business has been limited to just absorbing media with one sense, and that being, their eyes, their vision. It's you can't you'll go into a store for a lot of companies anymore and really pick things up and touch it, and you have to make the biggest impact you can with the way your business looks, and so in the span of 2 years, like the value of design and creativity has just skyrocketed exponentially. um, and I've always believed that it's the most important part of a business, especially a new business. When you're trying to gain trust and make a big impact, what people see is really everything. And I mean, just with a little business savvy and some design taste, like you can do a lot. That there's entrepreneurs and solopreneurs out there, running multi-million-dollar empires, built off a landing page and a rough business plan, or like a Shopify store or a WooCommerce store, and they're just making bank on their small business. And in large part, it's because of design. And people subconsciously, they even if they're not trained designers, they can tell the difference between good design and bad design. Like they can't necessarily pinpoint, like, what's wrong. Like I would change the spacing between the type and the logo, that maybe the letter spacing a little bit. Like they're not going to go into that detail, but they can notice that it doesn't look like brands that they know are good, like Apple and Google. Like if it's an email blast or a website, you can tell the difference between, like Joe Schmo's garage business and something that is really locked up, like Apple and Google and what the titans of industry are putting out. So practically speaking, that's why I'm passionate about design. And personally speaking, I've been doodling and drawing ever since I was a little kid, like starting with drawings of Batman and Spider-Man and stuff like that. And still to this day, my favorite hobby is arguing with people on Facebook about Batman and Superman. So that has stayed. But throughout like my grade school years, I kind of developed that passion into like a fondness for more classical design and the fine arts and
Mm.
stuff like that. And so doing design professionally, or creativity professionally, is a way in which I can channel that passion into my everyday life and make money from that and make my livelihood from that. And that's really cool. And especially working like with startup businesses and like, with my own ventures and, just kind of this kind of new business realm. There's a lot of creative freedom with that and a lot of room to kind of use all of those skills, whether it be sketching or just design or copywriting or anything like that. I can kind of bring like the full arsenal of the Tom Smith creative suite into what I do. So that's why I'm passionate about design.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the Tom Smith Creative Suite, I liken the brand guide to kind of a culmination of all the creativity, whether it's web copy and voice and style guide and whatnot in terms of color and typography. So that's my next question. Actually, can you talk about what a brand guide is, and then why it's important for a startup to have it?
For sure, yeah. So your brand guide, to that point, it is a guide for your brand. It's if your business were a piece of IKEA furniture, it's the instruction manual to put it together. If it were a Lego kit, it's the little diagrams to assemble those toys. So yeah, it's really just like it's the holistic guide to everything that your brand is, from color to typography to graphic motifs to brand voice. Really everything that's going to resonate with your audience and pull your brand together and deliver that message about what your mission is, what your value propositions are, and etc. And it's important for a variety of reasons. From an internal operations standpoint, a brand guide is important because it's going to make it easier to onboard future employees and freelancers and stuff like that. So from the standpoint of freelancers, like looking at that brand guide, they're going to be able to produce deliverables that are in line with what past either you or past freelancers have produced, and it's going to look at cohesive, instead of getting a bunch of different things that may look good but they don't look like they're from the same company. And then it also relates to onboarding employees. Like a brand guide can go as far in depth as like company culture and stuff, and what your internal values are for for a company. So, having that brand guide there is going to give people, a better idea, not just your audience of what your company is doing, but your employees, and get them invested in what you're doing and get them passionate about what you're doing. So, that's where it stands from an operational standpoint. Um, and then, from your audience's standpoint, like we just had the Super Bowl, and I'm not a huge football fan. I know that's something of a sin in Georgia, but uh, it's I'm very much
Very
about.
off brand.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Exactly. I'm more about the chicken wings and the commercials. I like the
That's fair.
commercials.
That's fair.
It's like, if you look at the commercials, there are a lot of good ones this year, but certain commercials, and you can tell what company it is without seeing the logo or reading what company it is. Like, you can hear the note of a jingle, or you can see a color, or you can see like a sentence across the screen, or like a recurring character, or just a mood, or like a color scheme, a warmth of the camera, like all these like tiny little tangential things that you wouldn't think like you would be able to pick up. Oh yeah, that's Nike, or that's Uber Eats, or that's Coca-Cola. Like, but without seeing the logo itself just spelled out in black and white, you can tell what the company is because of that in-depth brand guide, and how much cohesion and work goes into delving into that brand voice, and all these different elements that come together to make all that is a brand. So from an outward standpoint, that's really a big part of why you want a good brand guide, and to invest in that brand guide for your company.
Based on the things you said, it's not only to onboard future employees to keep everybody on the same page and consistent, but also to give your employees a sense of your company culture, what you're all about, your values, your mission, as well as to give your potential customers a glimpse of it. Would you say, kind of, and maybe this isn't the right word, but it's like your brand personality, sort of? It's the way you make people feel based on the culmination of all these different characteristics, right?
For sure, yeah. That goes very much, like, specifically into the area of brand voice, like, how people
Mhm.
should feel, like, when they're seeing your company, and how that should resonate with them, and internally, how employees should feel at your company. What kind of workplace do you want to foster? Are you a work hard, play hard kind of company, or are you kind of like a kind of lax, just get it done, 4-day work week,
Mhm.
kind of company? So yeah, it's all that stuff, and really just hugely important to the success of a company, inward and outwards.
Got it. So you talked a little bit about figuring these things out, and obviously that requires some kind of strategy. So can you talk about brand strategy and what that is?
Yeah, so if the brand guide is the instruction manual, we're gonna switch over from IKEA furniture to cars now. So if the brand guide is the manual for your car, what all the blinking lights mean, and how to change the oil and all that good stuff, then the brand strategy is the roadmap to get where you're going. So you want to kind of assess where your company stands in the market, and then also take a look at the audience who's going to be interested in what your company has to offer, and then come up with the best way to approach that through your brand, through your visuals, through your messaging, and all that good stuff. And switching back to taking a look at your competition, what are the other players um, in the space, and how are you going to rise above them, or do something better than what they're doing, to make it viable for the customers to choose your brand over theirs. So it's kind of, you're looking in your car, you're looking left and right, but you're also looking at where you want to get to. So That's kind of what the brand strategy is. The brand guide's the instruction manual. The strategy is the roadmap to get where you're going.
Okay. So, okay. So, speaking on that a little bit further, and I don't think we talked about this before, but I mean, coming up with this stuff like your brand strategy and your brand guide, that takes a lot of time. And so I think that makes sense for somebody to, there's online resources for this, right? Like you can go on and see companies' brand, like you said, some are even public. I know that with Creative Coats, we just went through this process ourselves of creating a brand guide, and we're still in the process of it. And it is not a quick thing. Like
Yeah.
it's a kind of an iterative process, but also, you really do have to think deeply about where you want things to go and figure out what's working and what's not in that initial phase. And so hiring somebody, there's an advantage to having somebody do that, but also there's places out there where you can access like big companies brand guides. I think that they can show you how they've broken things down, right?
For sure, like Starbucks, for example. I don't have the link off the top of my head, but their brand guide is actually published on a webpage on their website. I think the same goes for NASA, and IBM as well. I think, but yeah, there's plenty. You can just Google brand guides, brand guide,
Mhm.
X company, and you'll come up with some results. You can take a look at it and everything that it delves into. So it's a really good kind of visual reference to your point to see what it's all about.
Yeah. Um, so, all right, let's talk about business name because that is commonly, I think sometimes we think, oh, well, I'll just pick a name, and there's more to it than that, right? So, can you talk about the best practices for coming up with a business name?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So to your point, like there's a lot more to it than just coming up with something snappy and catchy that you think sounds great. That is definitely the first step is finding that snappy and catchy thing. But before you fall in love with your name and go off to the races, you kind of have to hold your breath and go through like the viability checklist to if that name is going to be good for your business. So some example checks I like to go through on that list is first, is the domain name available? I mean, obviously, you're going to have a website for your business. Is the domain name available for your example name? So, just do a search on Google Domains or GoDaddy or your preferred registrar and see what's there. And if the .com is not available, this is just my advice. But if somebody else is using the .com for their own business under that same name, then I would steer clear and go someplace else. I know there's a lot of other top level domains you can do .co, you can do .ninja, you can do .farm. There's a whole bunch of other ones, but .com in as of today is still the cream of the crop. So if that one is taken, then I would recommend steering clear and brainstorming some other business names. The next check is, can you afford the business name? I mean, if you have a short business name, or if you have or like a very kind of not generic business name, but a business name that's constructed of real words, that especially less than 2 words, then chances are that domain is going to be very expensive. Like they can get into thousands of dollars, like hundreds of thousands of dollars for some domain names. So you'll want to make sure that you can afford the domain name. But then you can circle back to the first point there. Like if the .com is so prohibitively expensive, then you can choose like a top level domain that would be more cost effective, like .ninja or something like that. But that is definitely a consideration, the cost of it. Next is the trademark available. You can search for trademarks at the U.S. Trademark and Patent Office. Just Google U.S. TPO, and that'll come up. They have a trademark search engine. As with any government website, it looks terrible and it's not user friendly, but it will it will show you if the trademark is available or not. And of course, if somebody has the trademark registered for that name, then you can't use it. You gotta find something else. So that is something to take into consideration. Next are the social media handles are available. So you want to check the big ones: Facebook, Twitter. Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. Make sure that and at least the majority of them, that your business name, just at your business name, is available, so you don't have to compete with anybody else or go into your business name underscore official or anything like that, because that's just going to muddy the waters. So that's another kind of digital presence consideration to check when you're coming up with a business name. Um, Next, is it easy to spell phonetically? So if you're at a networking event, you're having some beers, you're having a good time, you're telling somebody about your business, and you want to, and you drop the name, but you don't hand them a business card or anything like that, and they go home and they try to Google your business, or they do it on your phone. Are they going to be able to sound it out in their head easily and get to the right business, or is there like a silent J in there that no one's going to expect, and they're going to have trouble doing that? So make sure it's easy for people to spell. In the same vein, is it easy to remember? If you just drop it by voice, are people going to remember it and remember who you are and what your business does, and able to remember that name? So that's a consideration. And then also search it on Google and see what comes up. And if there's a lot of competition, whether it be other businesses using the same name, other product lines using the same name, influencers using that name, like a YouTube channel, a World of Warcraft character, like if there's a lot of competition for that name, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, but just know that it is going to be a uphill battle in terms of overtaking that search placement for your name. If people are just going to go Google landscaping.com or whatever, it's that is definitely a consideration to keep in mind. But if you make it through those checks and everything is still good, then you can take a breath and know that you have a good business name that you can use. And in terms of actually coming up with the business name, I kind of divide it into two main avenues you can take. One, you can go very on the nose with your business name. So that's where the business name says exactly what your business is, or what industry you're in, like landscaping, LLC or landscaping.com. People know that that's not going to be a tax preparation service or something like that. They know you do landscaping. So the other option is to come up with a fictional name that you can build a brand on top of, a word that doesn't exist. You can think like Uber. That's technically a German word, but for the sake of this argument, Airbnb, Lyft, spelled with a Y instead of an I, Upwork, all fictional names that are not necessarily. It's not obvious if this was a brand new business what it is, but it's a fictional word that they came up with, that they built a brand on top of. And now Uber is synonymous with ride sharing, and Airbnb is synonymous with room sharing, and Upwork is people know that is the go-to place for finding freelancers and contractors and stuff. So those are your kind of two main avenues, and the considerations that come up for both of those. With the on the nose name, you're going to spend a lot more money initially on securing that intellectual property. Like the domain name is going to be more expensive. Like the trademark may be taken. There's going to be a lot more. You may have to buy social media handles and stuff off people. The upfront cost is going to be a lot more extensive, but you're going to have to spend less on brand awareness again, because people know what you're doing. And on the converse of that, the fictional name is going to be a lot cheaper on the upfront to secure that intellectual property, but then you're going to have to invest more in brand awareness as you go on. So you're going to have to build that correlation between your fictional name and what your business does, like Airbnb or Uber. And then in terms of brainstorming fictional names, there's a million ways to skin a cat on this one, but my I don't know why I said skin a cat. I love cats. I have a cat. But
Yeah, don't bring cats into this.
in, nothing aside from scratch up my bed. In terms of brainstorming fictional names, I usually like to come up with a word map. And that entails writing, 4 to 5 adjectives across the top of a piece of paper, and then from there finding, new words that that previous word inspires, and writing a word below that, another descriptor, and a word below that, and a word below that, until you have a page full of words that relate to adjectives describing your business and words inspired by those initial adjectives. And then you have this map of words, and then you pick out different words and pieces from those words that you want to take, and you put them together um, to make new words. And it's kind of like a free form puzzle, and you just come away with a bunch of options that you might not have considered had you just been staring at the ceiling and trying to come up with business names. So that is my personal favorite approach and my go-to approach when it comes to coming up with new names. But again, a lot of options out there. Another strategy that can be implemented or used to augment that word map is you can turn to antiquated or foreign languages like Latin. That's popular business names will do a play on like a Latin word or something like that, or like a foreign language that is foreign to your market, but may have some kind of poetic um, significance to your business. And then you can also turn to fictional universes, like you can go to Greek mythology or Norse mythology and find something from those universes that relate to what your business is doing. And so it's a semi-fictional word, but is going to be unique in that it has that greater story and narrative to it, and will have a greater chance of not being taken. Um, and also, you can research competitors and see what kind of names they're using, what phonetics they're using, how long their names are, and what approaches they're taking. Because chances are, if it's working for their customers, if they're still in business, then it could work for your customers too, and you can just piggyback off the investment they've made there.
That makes sense. I got two comments for what you said. You talked about Latin, and my boyfriend works for I guess it's not really a startup anymore. They've been in business going on 5 years, but their company is a waste management company. And so they are detritus, which that's Latin for, I was looking at my phone to make sure I was right, but it's Latin for waste basically, and trash. So they use that for their overarching company name. And the second thing I got to say is, what about companies that don't necessarily are domain names or company names that kind of get your point, they get your point across and related, but you remember. So here's an example of that. I was driving down Victory, and there was a small truck, and I think that the domain was, and I looked it up while you were talking. That's why I was looking down to make sure. It was called gotyourgoat.com. And it says that it's parked free now, but I could have sworn it was that. And it was a goat rental company where you could rent a goat to come eat the grass in your lawn.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to mow. And I never forgot it. I saw this a few years ago, but it was either Get Your Goat or Got Your Goat, something like that. But anyways, I just had to point that out, is if you got that memorable domain name, or you've got that memorable company name that stands out, that also does the trick.
Yeah, there's a million ways to go about it, and that, like, kind of taking that marketing, like, kind of old school, like shock value approach, and making people like, I wonder what that is. Like, my favorite sunglasses brand, I'm gonna drop their brand here because it's such a good name in my opinion, but it's called Crap Eyewear, and it's actually really good eyewear, but they just went with crap because
Yeah.
people are like, yeah, that can't be crap, that can't be right. So yeah, to your point, it's just like make people wonder.
You never forget. Yeah. Um, and there was something else I was going to say too. And I think it was, there's another element that I've talked with startup companies is maybe they have like an overarching company name that isn't memorable, but they have segments underneath, right? I'm thinking of like media companies specifically. So you've got like, like, for example, if I had a media company, my last name is Lance, it might be Lance Media, but then the thing that I might be selling would have its own domain underneath it that gets the message across, and it's not necessarily the name of my company, right? I mean, is that an option? Am I getting that correct?
Yeah. So getting a little bit more into the biz dev side of things, like, yeah, you can absolutely have holding company or entity, and then incorporate like a DBA, a doing business as name under that, for different lines of business that you want to start, without going through all the rigmarole of doing a new incorporation and starting from scratch. Like Google's holding company is Alphabet, and now Facebook's, I guess Facebook has rebranded to Meta, or Meta is the holding company of Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram and everything. So it's this overarching company, and as they come up with new products and new lines of business to approach different demographics, then they just add that as a sub company under that holding company, in which case you have a greater degree of flexibility and new names that you want to try and test out and bring to the market.
Yeah, but I guess it would be the same process too, because you still want to have a unique personality or brand guide for those sub brands, right? So
Right.
yeah.
Uh, so yeah, but it's like the if you want to have that flexibility, you can go with something that's maybe a little less consumer facing, and then have that freedom, like just knowing that it's not set in stone. There's no, you're not chiseling something. You have the leverage after to build more stuff under that kind of overarching umbrella.
Okay. Okay, so quick review. We've talked about the brand guide and why it's important to have for your startup. And then we've talked about the brand strategy that goes behind that and your entire company. And then we've talked about best practices for coming up with a business name. So what are some elements for the design and creative checklist that people don't often consider or look over that we haven't talked about maybe?
Right. Yeah. There's a bunch of them. Like I would allude back to, reference back the like kind of the internal aspect of like a brand guide and stuff, and how the brand guide impacts, um, the internal culture of a company and what have you. But I think one of the most important things that people don't consider when doing like this design and creative checklist, is like the intellectual property protections and getting your trademarks and your process patents and stuff like that for your name, logo, creative processes and stuff, because those intellectual property protections, like in a digital company, they become your first assets. They do have a monetary value behind them, and those assets can actually be leveraged, for things such as loans and whatnot. You can put them up as collateral. And then B, it's dramatically impacts the valuation of your company when you go to sell in a good way. If you have those intellectual property protections and those processes documented, and such, like you think about it, and a brand is really like the box and the wrapping paper to your company. So having all that in order and having that kind of protected, and knowing that the value propositions of your brand are directly correlated to the brand and creative behind it, that's a much more enticing offer to the potential buyer of your company. So I think a lot of people kind of think a brand, it's just a logo, it's just typography, it's this is just the way I do things, it's just a means to an end, it's just something pretty, but it's actually a very valuable asset that's going to be a pillar of your company as you continue to grow it. So in that sense, it's definitely worth spending some time on, and thinking real hard about, and getting it right from the get-go, because it is really important.
Yeah. And you touched on a really important point there is exit strategy. Is a lot of people, when they're coming up with their startup idea, they're like, we get really excited about the romance of entrepreneurship, but we don't really think about needing our exit strategy and our long-term plan in place, because you can't, I mean, you can run it your whole life, but the question is, do you want to? And if you don't want to, how do you want to pass it on or sell it, or, and what things need to be in order for you to really do that. And so it's really thinking long term when you're doing that. And that's so important. But we talk to so many business owners or new business owners who don't realize that that is an important part of planning a company. Is what are you going to do, 20, 30 years from now when you want to retire, or maybe this is such a valuable idea that you do want to sell it. What's your plan for that? So that's a really good point. Okay, so, and a couple points to that is, can we talk really quickly? I know we're coming up on, like, we've got about 20 minutes left, but I know I've done this in the past. The best way to see if, a brand is taken, you talked about the website, the government website. I think it's like, what is it, USTPA.gov or something like that, or am I
Yeah,
wrong? It's something.
USTPO.gov, I believe, is the
Yeah. TPO, not TPA, I think USTPO.gov, something like that. You can go in and search. But also, I've called up a local lawyer who, and they didn't quote me crazy, just to look into if a domain, if anybody had claim to it. And they did a real quick search and could do all that for me. They actually didn't charge me for it, but they said, if you want to go through with, legally getting it and trademarking and copyright stuff, whatnot, they could help me with it. But they checked it for me. And there was also a site that they told me about for checking the value of names and who own, it's like who done it, or who, it's not who done it, but it's called something where you can see who owns the brand that you want, or
Yeah.
the name of a domain, or the name of a company, and you can buy it from them. And I can't think of the name of it. I wish I could. But I used to use it all the time.
There's a few out there that kind of do similar things to that. Maybe we can kind of post some of those references like on the when you upload this podcast. But yeah, and to your point, like you can always go if a lawyer, have a relationship with a lawyer who can do that research for you. That always works, and then LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer, kind of like these Uberfied legal services sites. Like they also have that those similar services for checking the viability of a name and if it is available and all that good stuff.
Yeah. And there's some tricks to that too, because I know when I was talking to the lawyer, it was like, well, even if the name isn't listed, if somebody has, there used to be something years ago with, like, if you had a social media handle, you could even have claim to the name of a company. And I can't remember if that's true, but, I can't remember what the details were, but if somebody has used or put into place a handle that they've been using for X number of years, something like that, they could have claim to the name. It doesn't really matter. I'm getting too fine into details, but that's why working with somebody like you too, who has years of experience, like in research on this stuff, is helpful. And I think, probably don't need to go through a lawyer if you're working with somebody who's been in design for as long as you have. But just a thought, I think there's something about handles, but you know better than I do.
Yeah, there's like it's and I can't personally speak to it as well as like an intellectual property lawyer could speak to it, but there is some kind of espionage stuff that you can do, like if the handle is taken, then you can establish your brand and trademark the name, and then retroactively go back and kind of make claim to that handle and what have you. But the real trick is this is kind of getting, like, unless you're really in love with a business name, in my opinion, the trick is kind of laying down the checklist to avoid being in any kind of creative espionage battles with people across the web and stuff. But to your point, if that is the case, then there are avenues you can follow, and it might be a really good future podcast to spend more time on just intellectual property and all that stuff.
Yeah. It sounds like that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we could go down. But so talking about, going back to this kind of being a really deep iterative process, we've condensed this down to about an hour, but from my experience doing this, and, from your experience, obviously, this is not it's not necessarily a quick process. And when you're coming up with your startup and you're getting everything together for it, branding sometimes seems like the simplest part, but that's what kind of gets tricky, right? Like if you make it so simple, then you're not really planning for your future, for one. And then on the other side of it, if you want to do a good job, you may not have the time to do it. So um, let's talk about two things. If someone decides they don't want to do this themselves, how do you go about finding the right talent to help you? Because that's huge. And then well, let's start there. Start there.
Yeah, for sure. So that really comes down to like a budgetary issue in terms of how much capital you have to invest in this idea and this venture and what have you. So if you're kind of like an entrepreneur and you're bootstrapping the side hustle and you want to keep costs as low as possible while not taking on the creative sweat equity yourself, then you can always go to websites like Fiverr and Upwork and 99 Designs, stuff like that. They all have just a plethora of creative and design talent to choose from. And then within that kind of platform realm, you do have the choice. Any entrepreneur kind of knows the balance between going with U.S. or Canadian talent versus overseas talent, and there's so much talent across the world, and it can definitely be viable. There just are caveats that you have to keep in mind, such as potential language barriers, understanding of the North American market or the market where you're located is a huge thing. The audience preferences in one part of the world are going to be vastly different than they are in another part of the world, just across all variables. Um, and then more kind of skeevy things that you can risk is the usage of like cookie cutter templates that are being pawned off as unique works, which is very dangerous for any IP protection and stuff like that. And then on a more malicious front, like trapdoor plugins and integrations for web development and stuff like that. And that's not to cast any broad nets. Like, I've worked with really talented freelancers across like all industries across the world, and have had a lot of positive experiences. um, and that's just some negative caveats that I've come to face, and that could be the potential for U.S. talent as well. But um, it's just something to consider. And then on the other end of that, if you were looking to hire U.S. talent, it's obviously going to be a slightly higher premium to account for higher cost of living and whatnot, and naturally that just kind of hikes the price up a little bit. But you're going to eliminate a lot of those caveats, and you're going to have somebody who's in a similar time zone and who understands the has grown up in the same market space as you and as your company, and so that may be more of an eloquent relationship, if you will. And if you're looking to kind of have your cake and eat it too, one strategy is to find freelancers and contractors who are new to these platforms and maybe don't have a lot of reviews or testimonials and stuff, and are looking to establish that clout, but do have real world experience outside
Mhm.
um, of Upwork and Fiverr and stuff. You can often hire them, and uh, their rate will most likely be lower than somebody who's showing up in the top search results of Upwork and Fiverr and 99 Designs and stuff like that. So that's kind of like a good compromise there, if you're looking to kind of maximize your spending and what have you. um, and then in a similar vein, college interns are always an option for free creative, especially if you source from a reputable school. You can find some amazing talent. uh, you'll save a little bit on the on the premium you're paying. Of course, still pay college interns and stuff, especially if they're producing work that's going to be used in like the end result of your company. I think it's more than fair and expected to pay for that, but you will they will of course in the quest for experience have a lower rate than somebody with more expertise in the field. So that's something to consider as well. Their client management skills and their pace of work may not be um, at the level that a more experienced creative is going to have. Um, so that you may just need to exercise a little bit more patience. But on the other end of that token, they're the latest design trends and creative trends are going to be fresh in their minds. So if you're looking to push the envelope with your business's aesthetic, then hiring interns or just young people at the start of their career in general is a great avenue to go down. Um, and then lastly, at the top of the budget tier, you can go with a singular agency, and of course that's going to be incur more cost than just going to Upwork and Fiverr or going to the college route or anything like that. But at the same time, you're going to check off all of these boxes in a one-stop shop type of thing in terms of marrying the business and the creative and going through that checklist and doing the intellectual property protection considerations and making sure everything is cohesive and doing the competitive analysis and really setting you off on a great trajectory with your business and with your brand and setting you up for success and circling back to achieving that aesthetic that is going to be Apple or Google-esque that people are going to see and be like, wow, this is an empire. This is no garage business. This is the real deal, and I want I want to give my money to these people. So that's definitely the advantage of going with a singular agency or conglomerate of creatives. Um, and yeah.
Yeah. And I want to stress one thing you said too, is like definitely don't don't offer exposure instead of a payment
Yeah.
to interns or college students. There's nothing worse you can do and tell somebody, oh yeah, like I'll give you exposure if you design this this simple logo or for me, it's not a simple process. It takes time and work and effort. And so I think that's an important thing to stress. If you really want to look like Joe Schmoes, then offer exposure because you're not going to get the effort put in, the amount of effort put into it. People can't dedicate that amount of time and work to good design and branding for nothing. So
Yeah, exactly. It's like you get what you pay for, and like I, for example, freelanced while I was in college for a company up in New Jersey, and they paid me pretty well for a college student, and I was pretty happy with that pay rate, and it certainly gave me was better than the alternatives, and in exchange for that, I gave it 110%, um, I kind of channeled everything that I was learning in school into that company. So I think it was a good relationship. So yeah, definitely something to consider in that regard.
yeah. So the second part of what I wanted to talk about in terms of if you don't want to do this yourself, can we talk about the advantages of working with one person over, or like one agency, one individual, either or over, getting 17 different people to put your brand together, whether it be the copyright special, like I'm going to get the copyright specialist, or not the copyright, the copy specialist, the writer, the designer, I don't know. I'm trying to think of somebody else you'd get for a brand guide, but what's the advantage of working with one person or one agency over sourcing all these different people to build your brand guide?
Yeah, it can kind of be likened to playing a game of telephone when you're a kid. You know, you start with one message and it goes down the line of people, and by the time it gets to an end, most of the time it's a completely different message. So, you know, hiring, you know, a bunch of different freelancers just because like you see on Fiverr, like, oh, this guy does really cool logo work. I'll get them, and this person does you know, really cool web pages. I'll get them, and just having them go autonomously and parallel to each other without any communication, then you'll come up with, you know, potentially good looking stuff that looks like it's from 17 different companies. So um, that's something to consider. I mean, you know, you can always boil it back down to management skill and operation skill, and you know, if you get you know, all these different people, you know, working on the same wavelength, and you have like a Discord going or like Slack or something like that, then you know, maybe that's a little bit more viable, but still it's going to be, you know, kind of a lay fair kind of um, potential mess for your brand. And another recommendation for that is again, just start with the brand guide, and in, you know, assign large swaths of work to small teams or individuals, so that you know, one person or agency has a holistic vantage point, you know, over this brand guide. And from there you can extrapolate outwards and then begin to, you know, grow your team and have a little bit more flexibility in terms of the number of team members you bring on, and number of contributors you bring on, and stuff like that.
Got it. That's great. That's great advice. This has all been great advice, and provided some direction. I know for people watching, it'll definitely be a great checklist just to review a little bit about what's on that checklist as the brand guide and the importance of a brand guide to a new business. And then we also talked about brand strategy that goes into that. We've talked about coming up with a business name and the elements that go into that. We've talked about the parts of the design and creative checklist that people don't consider when it comes to IP protections and so forth. And then, you know, the best ways to go about finding talent to help you, whether it be you're using Fiverr in a cheaper, not a cheaper way, but sourcing people at a lower rate because you have you don't have as much capital, or working with a larger agency or one person to achieve all this. So what we'll do is we're going to post this, so anybody, if you missed any part of this, you can go back and catch up on this. It'll probably be posted by next Monday. Probably it'll be in our newsletter. You can subscribe at thecreativecoast.org. But before we go, I want to ask, how can viewers and listeners get in touch with you, Thomas?
For sure. You can email me at tom@anchorpointcollective.com. And you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. We're mutual connections, Kate, and I'm usually online there, and pretty easy to get a hold of on LinkedIn. So definitely those two options. And like you said, I'm down at the Creative Coast a whole lot. So if you're local to Savannah and stop by 2 East Bryan, you know, there's a good chance that I'll be here. So you know, and if not here, I'm probably sipping one of my favorite cocktails around one of the many